they want to hear. They really just want to hear you talk, but let's get into it. Good evening, everyone. I'm Zach Pozner, Director of Architecture in the Stanford University Architects Office. Welcome to Stanford's Spring Lecture Series in Architecture, Landscape, and Urban Design. The theme of this year's series is the architecture of joy. In his book, The Architecture of Happiness, Alain de Botton writes, "It is perhaps when our lives are at their most problematic that we are likely to be most receptive to beautiful things." That point was proven in March of 2020, when many of us began sheltering in place in an attempt to flatten the curve. As we continue to emerge from this pandemic, let's reflect together on the incredible value of architecture in all of our lives. Our environment brings us joy, inspires us, and reminds us of our full potential, both individually and as a community. With that sentiment in mind, we invite you to sit back and relax and enjoy the inspirational work of our talented speaker. Before we begin, I want to thank the rest of our team who helps organize the series: Dave Lennox, the university architect; John Barton, the director of the Stanford Architectural Design Program; Padma Kudidipudi, and Nick Goulding. I would also like to thank the American Institute of Architects, Silicon Valley chapter, for their help in advertising the series and registering our program for continuing professional education. At the end of the lecture, your attendance will be automatically noted and submitted to the IA, so there's nothing for you to do there. Our next lecture is in 2 weeks, and we are pleased to have Blaine Merker from GEL. It will also be held virtually via Zoom webinar, just like today. There is some hope that our last couple lectures of this series will be in person, and please check our website for updates on that. We would still be doing on Zoom as well, but we might be able to do both in person and over Zoom. So the protocol for today's webinar, we have allocated 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the lecture for Q&A. Please use the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen to post any questions you may have during the lecture, and then I will group the questions together and present them to Bridget at the end of the presentation. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Brigitte Shim. Bridget was born in Kingston, Jamaica, and completed her architectural and environmental studies at the University of Waterloo, Canada. In 1994, Bridget and her partner, A. Howard Sutcliffe, founded Shim-Sutcliffe Architects in Toronto, Canada. Shim-Sutcliffe is an innovative architectural practice with an international reputation for masterful designs that bridge architecture, landscape, interiors, furniture, lighting, and hardware. To date, Shim-Sutcliffe have received 16 Governor General's medals and awards for architecture, which is the highest honor for a built work in Canada, along with an American Institute of Architects National Honor Award. Professor Bridget Shim is a faculty member at the Daniels Faculty of Architecture, Landscape and Design at the University of Toronto. She is the 2022 Foster Visiting Professor at Yale University School of Architecture, and has been a visiting chair and lecturer at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design, Cooper Union, the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, the University of Auckland, and others. She has served on numerous international, national, and local design juries as an advocate for design excellence, including the 2007 Aga Khan Architecture Award Master Jury. In 2013, Bridget and her partner, A. Howard Sutcliffe, were both awarded the Order of Canada for their contributions as architects designing sophisticated structures that represent the best of Canadian design to the world. And in 2021, Bridget and Howard were joint recipients of the Royal Architectural Institute of Canada's Gold Medal. Now, please give a warm Stanford welcome to Bridget Shim.
Great. Thank you so much, Zach. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I have been on your campus once quite a while ago, and was really fortunate to visit your Windover Wellness Center, which was really a lovely project. So first of all, thank you for the kind invitation. I'm going to do a kind of introduction that really gives you a sense as to some of the issues that Howard and I really love to explore and tackle within architecture. And then I'll present a kind of selection of built work, and then a project that is under construction at the final one. So hopefully by the introduction, you'll get a better sense of what makes us tick and some of the things that we really continually address in all of our projects. and then you'll see some specific work. So first of all, Toronto is that little red dot on the screen. We're kind of really in the sort of central part of North America. And in a way, the image on the left is actually a kind of diagram that really shows you the extent of the Canadian Shield. And the shield is, I think of as a stone necklace around Hudson's Bay. And it's actually the oldest rock in the world. It's called the Precambrian Shield. And it really defines so much of the territory that Howard and I build in. The image on the right is an image from Tom Thompson, one of the members of the Group of Seven. So an artist that was Canadian. And really what before the Group of Seven, much of the Canadian landscape was depicted through European eyes. And I think for the first time, you actually saw the ruggedness, the wildness of the landscape. You can see in this image whitecaps and the kind of exposed granite rock. And in a way, those are some of the features that really define this kind of non-urban landscape just north of the city of Toronto. So here's a kind of drawing that shows the Great Lakes, and Toronto's on the north shore of Lake Ontario. But I really see us as part of a kind of Great Lakes system, the watershed of the Great Lakes. Amazing cities like Chicago, Buffalo, Toronto are all part of this kind of ecology of the Great Lakes. And here's a view of the Great Lakes, but in winter. And I was saying before that it's March, but it's still pretty wintry in Toronto. It's a very long season. And in a way, it defines so much of who we are and our climatic zone. So often we actually photograph our projects in a snowstorm. This is a very early project we call the Orchard House, kind of a plywood box and a stone building, but situated in a kind of existing apple orchard. We think about our buildings from the outside in, but we also think about them from the inside out. And here we've actually positioned the kitchen window so that you're actually in the orchard and you're really part of the landscape itself. And so winter, we really love to celebrate. We love to kind of appreciate the kind of delight of winter. And so we actually have experimented for a long time with the role of winter water, which is almost an oxymoron sometimes, but the idea that you can have running water through the winter for us is a real pleasure and a delight. The whole issue of again, thinking about our projects, not just during a verdant, sort of lush green landscape in the summer, but also actually designing them so that they have a winter dimension to them. This is a project called the Weathering Steel House, and you're seeing it in winter. And then also the role of water in public spaces. So this is a small public park, but the whole idea of winter water being a kind of crucial part of animating these urban spaces throughout the year. And again, the role of skating, so reflecting pools becomes skating rinks, and the seasonal dimension for us is a really key component of really celebrating each season and giving it a certain specificity. And then we love the way that water really proximate to buildings has the capacity to really register and measure changes of state, steam, ice, mist, and that normally you would never be aware of these different conditions, but water really close to buildings throughout our winter season has this amazing transformative and almost magical quality. And then again, we're always thinking of our buildings in winter, trying to photograph them and trying to capture this quite important season for us. The other aspect that we really explore in all our buildings is the role of light. And I would say, we're again very conscious not only of the harsh summer light, but again, the low winter light and low angles. This is an early study model of a synagogue that we did in Portland, Maine. Very simple model that we built in our studio, but we're using it to shape the light and to think about the way light enters our spaces. This is a kind of urban laneway house in the city, and we're using a kind of lay light below the actual skylight to filter and again shape the light. So this kind of, whether it's urban or non-urban, the kind of issues of light are equally challenging, and that they're really important to be always thinking about and engaged with. This is a dining hall in about 3 hours outside of Toronto. This is called the Moorlands Camp Dining Hall. It's a camp that's been around since 1907. It was set up by the Anglican Church to get youth out of the city during the summer and experience nature. And we were asked to design a dining hall, and we really wanted to celebrate light. It's a seasonal building, so it's only open from maybe May till October. And what you're seeing in the main space is actually a series of glulam frames, a series of metal tie rods that actually work in conjunction with the wood. And then down the center is actually a whole series of 2x4s. So very simple wood elements. And above it is actually motorized greenhouse glazing. And the greenhouse glazing is really off the shelf, so very much kind of industrial greenhouse, but it provides both light and ventilation. So it's actually motorized, and it can go up one side, the other side, or both sides. So it really brings in light and fresh air into the space at the same time. This is a project, again, on the same lake, Lake Coagama. And this is a residential project that we designed. And in this case, the light is coming from the south. This project is located on the south side of the lake, but the views are to the north. So what you're seeing is a series of Douglas fir trusses. And then on the left-hand side are a series of clear story windows. And on the right-hand side are a series of wood windows that look toward the view. So we're actually working with the light, the way light enters the space, to really shape the space fundamentally. This is a project that I'll actually be sharing with you called the Integral House, which sits on the edge of a Toronto ravine. But what you're seeing it in is winter light. And we live at 43 degrees latitude. And the role of winter light for us is really important because, again, it's a very low raking light and it changes so much. So you can see the ravine beyond is actually denuded. It's in the winter season, and that it's only during this time of the year that you get these amazing kind of light qualities that differ fundamentally from spring and fall and summer. So we think of ourselves as architects who paint with light. This is a poster from a kind of the Venice Biennale a few years ago. And we were asked by the University of Venice to actually select 6 of our projects and to draw really large sections of those 6 projects to really think about our work in section. And in a way, I think we were really, it was a really interesting challenge. And I would say that we've always thought about section as one of the key and most important aspects of how you design architecture. So this is a view of the kind of exhibition at the Biennale. And then this is our kind of panel where we actually selected several projects, and we actually blew up the actual section really large. And we actually called it walls of light, so that within the wall itself and the thickness of the wall, there were different ways that light informed and embedded itself into the wall. And then we actually used it to study a lot of our projects with the role of light. The image on the left is actually a kind of diagram where you can see a very small building that we designed, a studio, with a very small skylight that becomes the aperture, and the wall changes thickness on every surface. The image on the right is actually a section through a synagogue that we designed in Portland, Maine. And you're seeing, in effect, the asymmetrical section, the kind of curving underside of the roof, and the way that the light enters the space itself. So it's just something that we think about a lot. We actually love the way that light can be manipulated and shaped to really give a kind of certain specificity to places. So this is a view of that small studio and a detail where you can see this small skylight here, and then the thickness of the wall. And then here in the image of this one room studio, you can see that each wall is a different thickness. Partly one wall is for display, another wall is for storage, And so the kind of skylight stays the same, but the thickness is actually related to the program. And then the light enters these kind of wooden coffers and then illuminates the room itself. And here's the display wall. So for us, these small projects that we do in our studio are really important because they become laboratories for experimentation. In the Canadian landscape, no matter how small or large you think your building is, it's actually quite puny in relation to the scale of Canada. So we are the second largest landmass in the world. It's full of forests, rivers, multiple types of landscape, but we're always having to use elements of the landscape to really go beyond our buildings, whether that is retaining walls, pools, in this case, bridges, to kind of extend the building beyond the actual footprint itself. So this is a small pavilion where we're kind of in the landscape, and there's a kind of indoor-outdoor quality to everything. And then this is a view of a covered outdoor space, but we're actually looking at a Toronto ravine in the distance. So in a way, our building becomes a foreground to a natural landscape in the background. And so this oscillation between foreground and background and the kind of role of architecture really kind of shaping and framing, in effect, a found condition for us is really important. The Toronto ravine system is really an important part of Toronto as a city. And one of the most important trees in this ravine is the black locust. And so here we've actually used water jet cutting to cut out the leaf pattern of the black locust tree. And this space here is actually, you're seeing the leaf pattern of the black locust cut out of weathering steel on the outside of the building itself. This is a view of from the same location in the autumn. So you're looking at the color of the fall leaves that are read through the actual laser water jet cut screen. So this kind of relationship between nature and culture and the kind of way that nature is embedded in architecture is something that interests us, it fascinates us, and that we continue to explore it in many different ways. So the only color you're seeing is actually from the autumn leaves on the outside passing through the double glazing on the inside. This is Howard, my partner, and he is flame cutting the edge of a roof that's about 1.5 tons of rusting steel. But in a way, it sort of indicates our long-term interest in materiality. We actually work with real materials. We love working with fabricators. And for us, it's a kind of critical part of really shaping buildings as opposed to specifying buildings. And this is a kind of full-scale mock-up of one of our projects. So this is actually in the fabricator shop. So we'll often ask for and build large-scale pieces. So this is a close-up of that, where we're looking at the relationship of gaps and small bars to really give a kind of detail to the kind of skin of the building. And then this is actually the building itself, where you can start to see some of these elements in the facade, and that we work directly with those that are doing the installation. So we're really thinking about ways to make our installations better, faster, but also more accurate and precise in terms of what we're after. So, and thinking about the aging, the weathering, the patina of buildings all the time. This is a kind of facade of a project I'll show you later for a group of Catholic nuns, but we're always also trying to do full-scale mock-ups. So this is actually a view of the elevation of the building, a kind of detail of one portion of the building, and then this is a kind of photo of a full-scale mock-up that goes about 1.5 floors. The project envelope and the kind of vertical sunshades were actually built in Germany. And so this is actually the mock-up in a testing facility. So we were able to kind of test it where they hurl water and with push by wind. They monitor it, and they actually do a whole analysis, and they find ways to improve the performance of the actual system with minute adjustments before the window goes into fabrication. Here's a view of the facade of the building, and I'll show you the whole project a bit later, but this slide is really to kind of indicate that here's the detail of these vertical sunshades, where we're working with shaped Corten steel as well as powder coated aluminum. And that in a way, the only way that you can do things that aren't, from a catalog or standard is actually to, in effect, invest in the mock-ups, to test them both visually and in terms of their performance, to really be experimenting with new ways of thinking about how to skin buildings and to shape them. So the first project I'm going to show is a sacred space. This is actually a Taoist temple in Toronto. This is a kind of cardboard model, so not very fancy, but in a way it was a very important early model for us. Taoism is one of the oldest religions in the world, along with Buddhism and Confucianism. The Taoists actually do Tai Chi, which is a kind of form of exercise. So you've probably seen people doing Tai Chi in a park somewhere. But in a way, for the Taoists, it's actually a key aspect of their spirituality. So it's not just an exercise, but it's actually part of their kind of sacred practice as a religion. And in this building, they had to provide a lot of parking on site, and we were struggling with the overall design. And then when we shared this kind of small facade model with them, they all looked around and said, whipped horse. And we were kind of scratching our heads trying to figure out what that meant. And it was actually a Tai Chi move. And it was actually, they really loved this model because it was both asymmetrical, but also in equilibrium. And so they really loved this kind of condition because it reminded them of this Tai Chi and the way that you actually move through these movements. So this is a very early study model, again, not really kind of fancy, but actually looking at the kind of interior of the space. And we actually wanted to create a series of light monitors that would actually bring light and pools of light into the space. And also because they burn incense, we needed to have it ventilate really easily. So all these skylights are all motorized, and they can kind of refresh the space really quickly. So this is actually the project completed. And what you're seeing are two things. One is actually a series of concrete, poured in place concrete piers. It's a kind of double row of piers that are tied together with a raft foundation. So a kind of big, kind of chunky raft that supports these piers. And on one side is actually a 10-meter cantilever, and it's actually balanced by a 5.2-meter cantilever on the other side. So one is actually then helping the other in terms of the cantilever. It's all post-tension concrete and also provides a kind of shaded area to do Tai Chi for much of the year. The vertical fins are actually all weathering steel. They create a level of privacy for the inside, but also allow for great cross ventilation through the whole building. This canopy becomes a key marker of the entrance of the building. You can see from the site plan, it's actually in a fairly suburban setting. So their neighbors are suburban houses in a cul-de-sac. Across the street is a gas station. So it's a kind of very much a suburban edge condition in the city. The plan is very simple. So you can see at the back, there's a memorial hall for honoring your ancestors, burning incense. And then the room itself is for chanting and praying to Wang Dai Sin, which is the deity the temple is named after. You can see these deep fins that actually provide both privacy, but also allow for cross ventilation, and then washrooms back of house and a small kitchen. So pretty simple plan with an outdoor terrace on the other side. And then here in section, it's actually very telling. So you can see the 10-meter cantilever. the structural concrete, poured in place concrete piers, and then the 5.2 meter cantilever. You can also see these circular light monitors that are really key to the kind of most sacred part of the place of worship, and the kind of way that the structure is actually kind of cantilevered in both directions, which is a really key part of the project. And then this is a drawing that shows you those fins and then the light monitors and the kind of way that all of this is suspended up above the grade and cantilevered. So here's a view at night where you can see in effect that same facade, and it gives you a sense of the concrete piers. You actually can park under the building, and then this long 10-meter cantilever. And this is a view from the north side looking to the south. So you're looking at, on the left, stairs up to an outdoor terrace, a small elevator that goes from the ground floor up, and again, this long 10-meter cantilever, which is kind of key to the overall idea of the project. This is a view of the west elevation. So it actually is totally blank and partly related to residential buildings that are the neighbors, but also an amazing reflector of nature. So you're looking at trees on the adjacent property actually being kind of registered on the facade of the building. And again, you can see the kind of these concrete piers that are holding up this double cantilever. And then below it is a whole raft foundation that ties it all together. So here we're under the smaller cantilever. You can see one of the edge of the concrete piers, and you can see these light wells are actually structural glass. And I'll show you later where they're actually the flush with the terrace above, but bringing light down below itself. So here's a view from the smaller cantilever looking across to the bigger cantilever, and you're seeing the concrete piers and the kind of view through to the place where they do Tai Chi. And here on the left, it gives you a sense of the thickness of the structural slab, and then also the kind of structural glass that brings light down into this level. There's a main entrance that's demarcated by a canopy that comes across to give you a sense as to where the front door is. And here's that outdoor terrace, and you can see these planes of structural glass that again bring light down to the lower level. And then once you're inside, this is kind of the deity Wang Dai Sin, which is what the temple is named after. And you can see these light wells, light monitors that inform the space. So here's a view of the main space with benches for members of the community to sit. And then the yellow silk is actually the kneelers where the chanters actually spend their time. The light monitors are also supporters of these large spirals of incense, which are kind of part of what they do. The smoke of the incense connects you to your ancestors. So there's always a kind of relationship between where you are and where the smoke goes to. And then at the back, there's actually a memorial hall where you can honor your ancestors. The whole memorial hall is all lined in bamboo, and then they mark your parents or your aunts and uncles or people that you actually want to be honoring. So here's kind of coming back a view of the kind of way that they use the space for Tai Chi within this kind of suburban context. And here you're seeing the underside of the structural slab with the post-tension concrete, providing in effect a kind of big sunshade or canopy for Tai Chi. The next project is actually a project called the Integral House. So I'm actually going to show two projects that are at the edge of a Toronto ravine. And on a good day, you can actually see one project from the other. So they're both kind of related to each other, even though one is a single residence that's also a community space, and the other is actually a residence for a group of Catholic nuns. So this project was done for an amazing client, a mathematician who is also a concert violinist. And his view was straight lines are boring. and he wanted curves. He was a calculus professor. And so for him, it wasn't just a line that was a curve, but he wanted volumetric curves. So this was a very early sketch. This was a study model that is looking at the main space. So in addition to curves, he actually wanted a performance space. He was a concert violinist, and he wanted a performance space for about 150 people in his living room. So in a way, it's a private project that kind of straddles a public program. And so here's an aerial view looking down at the main living space. And as part of that living space, we actually designed 97 different fins that help to shape the light. And I think that you saw in the image we showed in the winter, this long winter light, that part of how we are able to do that is by these kind of shaped fins that bring the light in, but also adjust and alter the kind of light before it enters the space. How we're doing that in these deep fins is that we actually embed a double glazed sealed unit between these shaped fins, and every third one of these fins is actually structural. So there becomes a huge structural cage. But really what happens is that you're looking at light and wood. So the light passes through and develops a warm glow because of the way it passes through the wooden fins. So this portion is actually exterior and made out of a kind of tougher, long-lasting wood. And then this portion is actually interior and part of shaping the interior space. And then the glazing is actually a double glazed sealed unit, but it's actually embedded in the wood. So you don't really see a window frame. All you see is light and wood. So here's a view of a series of these outdoor covers, and you can see they're all numbered, and then they're fitted to go on the exterior of the building. And then here you're seeing some of the interior fins that was part of the construction process. Then we also have what we call a more standard fin, where this is a kind of épais cap, a double glazed unit, and then a more standardized fin. And what you're seeing is again, you're never reading the window frame. The actual double glazed unit just slips into the kind of, and in behind the wooden fin. And so again, all you're reading is wood and light. And here's a full-size version of that same detail. And then here you're seeing the standard fin. And in a way, both become really key in building this kind of elevation in the middle of a ravine forested landscape. So here's a whole series of studies, and this is just a selection of many. So the upper portion are the deeper fins, those 97 different ones that I showed you. And then the lower one are the kind of standardized fins. And every third or fourth one is actually structurally loaded through to the foundation of the building. So we're testing and using these collages to test the kind of way that it creates different views and shapes your reading of the landscape. And then this is a view of the main performance space, and you can see these deeper fins up above and the more standard fins down below. And in a way, we thought of it almost as a golden curtain, delineating the line between ravine and the interior. So we actually took a series of photographs from the same location that actually allows you to see the fact that the screens are not kinetic. They don't move. They're actually fixed, but the landscape keeps changing in relation to it. So this is actually springtime. This view is actually the verdant summer, which is a really wonderful season. And then this is autumn. And then this is winter. So this kind of idea of this dynamic landscape and the relationship between the inside and the outside. And here's a section. So the street and the city is up here, and the ravine itself ends up somewhere way down here. So you're really at the edge of this important natural feature that helps to define the city of Toronto. This is a cross section where you enter at this level, and come down a full floor to the performance space where 150 of your closest friends can hang out with you. Above are some residential bedroom spaces, study spaces below, and then pools at the lowest level. And so here is the plan at the lowest level, where there's a kind of swimming pool, back of house, and change areas. As we move up, there's actually a library and gallery space. And then as we move up, this is the ground floor of the performance space. And then this is the entry level, where this becomes the double height space that you look down onto with kitchens and dining rooms. So this is the view of the exterior, where there's a kind of convex and concave etched glass. And then these are the deeper fins that I showed you before. There's 97 different fins, but it's actually at this level kind of sitting in a reflecting pool. And then the grade keeps dropping off as you move down the ravine. This is a view at the entry where you can see these big poured in place concrete elements and the ravine around you and the beginning of this golden curtain. And then this is what it looks like when 150 of your closest friends come over. So there's kind of a whole kind of spatial sequence. And again, always having these glimpses and views of the ravine. The material palette, we actually use concrete, kind of limestone, bronze, and leather, and then a stainless steel mesh to be part of the kind of vocabulary on the inside. And then again, these kind of views of the ravine that you're getting everywhere that you turn. And so here you're descending down to the main space, and you're sort of almost like you're traversing a hillside. So it's like a switchback stair. And this is what it looks like when 150 of your friends are coming over for a concert. Looking back to the stair, and we're working with leather and bronze and the stainless steel mesh. And then views from one side across to the other. So from the living to the dining room, and then the performance space in between. And a sense of this kind of curvilinear form in relation to the ravine itself. And again, another kind of view that gives you a sense of this amazingly low winter light. And again, this transformation through the seasons and the role of both the upper fins and the lower fins to kind of be shaping and manipulating the light. And then the space has been used for thousands of concerts that have taken place in it. So it was really designed as a performance space, a kind of salon, and for music, but also for other types of the arts. Here's a view of the next stair down, where the stairs are pushed to the exterior. So you're almost traversing a hillside when you walk through the house. And again, we're using limestone and wood and bronze within the kind of material palette. And here's another view of that same stair, where you're kind of almost outside of the living performance space, overviewing the ravine and descending down. And then glimpses of the ravine that you get in different locations. And a view of the reflecting pool. There's a big 35-foot long window that descends into the ground. So when it's down, you literally can go between inside and outside. And then a kind of blue glass stair that is actually a kind of art piece that we designed. So the glass is all hand-blown glass. It goes from dark to light blue. And what you're seeing is a series of bronze clips and a series of etched glass treads bringing light into a lower level. And here you get glimpses of the stair at different parts, in different parts of the building. So you're in the kitchen looking at a kind of glimpse of this blue stair. And then here you're outside of the blue stair, and you can see that those clips are actually held up by stainless steel cables. And so the outside of the stair is almost like a musical instrument. And the place has been used for so many different types of performances. This is a small group from the Simon Bolivar Orchestra from Venezuela. This is contemporary dance. This is a group called Nexus with Steve Reich. This is Philip Glass playing in the space. And then this is the local Boys and Girls Club. So there's been a whole range of amazingly different activities, and it's become a really cultural hub in the city of Toronto. Again, this is the kind of another opera singer in the space. And you can see the way that this kind of golden curtain kind of acts as the backdrop for all these events. And many of the musicians have said that it is almost like being inside of an instrument. So this kind of wooden reflector that actually creates really amazing acoustics and is also kind of feels like you're in an instrument. And then one of the things we really are happy about is that when you see it from the outside, from the ravine side, it's actually a 5-story building as opposed to a 2-story building when you're on the street. And that this is a view taken in February on the other side of the ravine, and it almost looks like it becomes part of the hillside. So the fact that it looks like it's always been there and almost becomes kind of camouflaged into the landscape was something we were really happy with. The next project is actually on the same ravine. So again, as I said, on certain times of the winter, you could actually see one project from the other. So they are actually on one side of the ravine versus the other side of a Toronto ravine. And this project was for the Sisters of St. Joseph, so a group of Catholic nuns. This image is actually their first monastery. The image on the right is their second monastery, which was in a suburban location. And we designed a new home. And I would say one of the important things is that the sisters wanted the greenest building that they could afford. And so we actually looked at a whole system of geothermal, PV panels, green roofs, and collecting of rainwater. And we priced everything umpteen times till we felt that, and everyone agreed we could afford it. So it was a kind of it was trying to get the best value possible for each of these elements and to see it as a system that worked together. The project is actually a residence for 54 Catholic nuns, a chapel, dining rooms, and the restoration of an 1850s house. And this is an axonometric, but what's important is in the middle is actually a double loaded corridor that actually has, a rehab, nursing stations, a lot of support facilities for the sisters. And then each of these wings are actually single loaded corridors where many of the sisters' rooms are located. And so you can go from the single loaded to the double loaded back to the single loaded. And here's a view from the Toronto ravine. So the other project I showed you, the integral house, is on the other side of the ravine, just a bit further down. This ravine is called the Don Valley, which is the eastern ravine system in our city. And this is a major expressway in the ravine. And here you can see a kind of post-war neighborhood called East York. This building is the Taylor House, which was built in the 1850s. And it was a kind of historic house that we restored and connected to be part of this whole little mini campus. This is the chapel with a green roof sitting in a reflecting pool, which is really the heart and soul of the whole building. And then here you can see the thicker double loaded corridor in the middle, and then 2 single loaded wings. You can see the PV panels on the roof, and the geothermal is actually in some of the ground elements. So here's another view where you can also see the double loaded corridors, the single loaded corridors, the 1850s house, and then the chapel with the green roof sitting really at the edge of the ravine. And a view again of the chapel looking south, and you can see this, our CN Tower and our Toronto skyline in the distance. In the site plan, you can see we have large congregational meeting rooms where they can all gather and meet, and they can also watch the hockey game. Most of the nuns are super big hockey fans. This is the lower level of the Taylor House that connects underground to all of the kind of back of house spaces for the sisters. And then as we go up, you can see the double loaded corridor and then the two single loaded corridors. This is a view of the Taylor House, which is again this historically designated house. And this is the new entrance with a kind of long cantilevered corten steel canopy, and then the main facade of the building itself. And there are about 250 geothermal pipes that do all the heating and cooling for the project. And again, a view of the main front elevation, the main point of entry. And above it is actually several floors of single loaded corridors. This is a view in the winter, and you can see the existing Taylor House and all of the amazing brick detailing and the turrets, and then our kind of weathering steel elevation. And again, a detail of the weathering steel on the outer and then the powder coated aluminum on the inner, providing these vertical sunshades that actually cascade through and wrap the building. And again, you're seeing the outer weathering steel and the inner powder coated aluminum. And then another view of this main entry with the field of geothermal below it. And again, a winter view where you're seeing the kind of main entry and then the way the building sort of extends out into the landscape. A view above looking at the upper portion of the canopy with these amazing slender struts. We work with some incredible structural engineers that can really make amazing things happen. And then the lobby, like the floors up above, are really skinny. So what you're seeing is in effect the driveway, the main lobby, and we actually have what we call our peanut columns, which is like a double column, a single column, and then the facade of the building, a reflecting pool, and then the edge of the chapel. So a kind of a key moment in the project. This is the double loaded corridors. It has all of the supports for the sisters, different kinds of rehab, fitness, and nursing stations. And then here's one of the single loaded corridors that go off in each direction. And so you're seeing in effect the underside of the structural slab, a kind of this white oak wall, and then the windows that are operable to allow for cross ventilation. And here you're actually seeing that each sister's room actually has a sitting area and a bedroom area. And then we actually have the chapel, which for the sisters was actually one of the key spaces, given that they are women, religious women of faith. And they really wanted a chapel where they could see nature. They had a very large chapel in their previous monastery, and you couldn't tell if it was snowing or raining because it was so internalized. And in this new chapel, they really wanted to be connected to the seasons, and that was very much part of the program that they asked for. And so here you can see the sisters' floors where the residential rooms are. And from the second floor, the most infirm sisters can actually enter the chapel from the second floor and partake in all of the religious services from the second floor. So here's the entry threshold, and you can see the reflecting pool that surrounds and embraces the chapel. This is the upper floor, the mezzanine that comes right from the sisters' rooms right into the chapel. These are the stations of the cross that they brought from their old monastery to the new monastery. And then a sense of this shaped space that's pushing in and pushing out at the same time. The role of the second floor, which is different, a series of wooden fins that help to shape the space, and a view looking toward the Toronto Ravine. So really this kind of really dynamic push and pull is so key to the dynamism of the space. and a view of the lush garden that was created outside of the chapel, the role of the reflecting pool that embraces the chapel, and then a view of it at night, really becoming the heart and soul of the whole project. So the very last project is under construction, so you'll have to wait till June to see it in person. So this is the Ace Toronto Hotel. So it's the first Ace hotel in Canada. It's actually new construction, but Ace is a chain of hotels where they actually began by repurposing existing buildings. And so we wanted a new building that actually, where you couldn't tell whether it was new or old. And so we started off in a neighborhood that is full of these existing red brick warehouses. So Toronto is a red brick city. The clay came from the Don Valley. The bricks were fired in the valley, and it's really the fabric of much of our city. And many of these warehouses that are really such amazing buildings are being demolished, being renovated. And so there are very few warehouses that are left in this area where the hotel is, when they were, and before it was populated by hundreds of them. So we're designing a new building, but we actually wanted to recall these amazing existing buildings that are dwindling. So here's an early sketch trying to think about the front facade of the building and really wanting to design deliberately a fabric building. So we didn't want it to read like a kind of weird monument. We actually wanted it to be this red brick fabric, which we felt was really important. Here's a study model showing it. This is a small playground called St. Andrew's Playground. And these are new buildings. And here's our 14-story hotel sitting within the city itself. And here's a view of it from walking up the street, where it sort of, again, has depth and plasticity and is really recalling these kind of red brick turn-of-the-century industrial warehouses. This is a view of the front facade that you see from across the park, and where each of these bays is actually 2 floors. And we wanted, again, to have a certain ambiguity as to what the scale of the building really is. Here's an early study model where we're actually looking at a series of poured in place concrete frames that actually transfer the load from the hotel rooms and uses the kind of these robust poured in place concrete frames to shape the lobby. Here's a drawing of the corner condition. So again, the kind of one side looking onto the park and the other side, which is a smaller side street. And again, the kind of entry, the main public entry, and then ramps for luggage and for accessibility to bring you to the same location at the entrance. Working with brick and shaping the brick, steel, a whole series of metal screens that work in conjunction with this red brick iron spot that we've chosen. Drawings that actually show this kind of big structural poured in place concrete frames. And then the lobby is actually slid inside and actually supported from these frames itself. And I'll show you some construction photos. So early study models where we're looking out across the park. And again, the role of these big concrete frames, these large, what we're calling knuckles, and then this kind of floating lobby that is hovering. This is a view of one of the hotel rooms, so that it almost feels like a cabin in the middle of the city. And then a view here where you're kind of at the entrance looking down to in the lobby. So the hanging portion of the lobby is on the left with these rods that actually support the lobby from these large poured in place structural frames. And to enter the restaurant, you actually slide down between the outer wall and this hanging lobby to kind of end up in this triple height space. So again, these are all construction photographs, but you can see we're standing in the lobby itself, looking south, and you can see those big concrete frames, the big knuckles. Then you're here looking out over the park, the St. Andrew's Playground, and again, the scale of the knuckles in relation to the kind of this urban lobby space. Again, a view of a three-story art installation and the kind of afternoon light entering the space. And views along the space where you're seeing, in effect, the kind of long view down. And then a kind of details of the stair itself, where we're also using rods to hold up the space. And again, a view of this art piece called Horizon Line and its role within the overall project. So that's my last image, and it's really a kind of work under construction, but it gives you a sense of what's to come, and we're really excited to see it happen because we really wanted to create a kind of dynamic civic room in the middle of the city where people could really be in the city, but also kind of enjoy this kind of dynamism of this multi-leveled space. So thank you so much. I hope you've have a better sense as to how we work and some of the things we think about and the kind of way that we actually approach architecture, both through process and then through the final results.
Thanks, Bridget. That was outstanding. I've got a couple questions I want to ask you.
Mm-hmm.
You have any water there? You want to take a break? That was
I know it's okay.
an hour of talking.
It's okay. I've got a cup of tea, so.
Part of what I love about this is your environment is so fundamentally different from where I'm working in Stanford and where a lot of people watching or working in the Bay Area. The climate is so extremely different. And you talked about how light influences your work a lot. You paint with light, and particularly at that latitude. What other things does it influence in the design process? The extreme climate, but also the impacts of that extreme climate, on mental health. Seasonal affective disorder, is a major thing in Canada sometimes. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that the issue of winter is kind of, I would say we're not as far north as cities like Helsinki or Stockholm, which have a much higher latitude. But I feel like this kind of question of winter is part of, the obsession with light, I think comes partly because in February, it can actually get dark by like 3:30, 4 o'clock, right? And so it's really different than somewhere that's more equatorial and where there's a kind of reliability of 6 o'clock, it just gets dark, period. Like if you're close to the equator, we're doing work right now in Hawaii and it's 10 degrees latitude. So it's, it's a kind of such a different a place to be in for us. So I feel like the celebration of light, the celebration of winter, and the way that architecture engages both the seasons and these light conditions is really so important to both your well-being, your sense of place, and they're all connected. So for us, these are really important qualities that we actually want all of our buildings to have and to think about. And then even water becomes another form of joy and delight through the winter. Anyone can do a fountain that works in the summer. It's when it goes all year round that it's actually more challenging, but the benefits are kind of amazing, right? Like you gain so much back from the kind of effort that's put in.
Yeah, I loved when you talked about the 4 different states of water in your work. It could be steam, it could be ice, and it could be moving water, and that helps activate the outdoor space in different ways throughout the seasons. That's so interesting compared to what we deal with in the Bay Area, which is about 12 months of autumn where I live. So that's fascinating to me. But I was also really encouraged by how much operable windows and open the indoor outdoor qualities where you you will pick a wall to open up seasonally when it works that way. So you're not just stuck inside all of the time.
Mhm.
Your material palette, I mean, especially in the residential projects, but even in the larger projects, you really gravitate towards a lot of concrete, glass, and weathering steel. How did that come about?
Well, I would say, the very first project that we did where Howard was flame cutting the edge was actually weathering steel. And it's a kind of interesting story because in the 70s, I think there was actually quite a lot of use of weathering steel. I think it's technically called Corten steel, is actually a trade name from
Right.
a kind of a US steel company. But weathering steel or atmospheric steel is more the generic name. And in Canada, there was a company called Stelco, which was a big steel company. And we really were interested in using this product because what we understood is it reacted to impurities in the atmosphere. So it was never static, it was always changing. And the fact that a material could register these changes was really fascinating for us. We were recent graduates, we didn't really know very much. So we actually called the research department at Stelco and we said, hey, we're really interested in using this material. And they basically said, under no circumstances should you use this material. They definitely had lawsuits. It has to go through a wet dry cycle. And if it can't drain properly, the moisture builds up and it just rusts out itself. So clearly it was, if you don't detail it really well, you definitely end up with problems. And so we asked them, where are some of these buildings that didn't turn out very well? And
Right.
so they gave us a list of all the failures, and we actually went to visit every single one of them. And these were all in Hamilton, like all within a kind of 45 minutes of Toronto. And we went to look at them, and we actually learned a lot. If it's too thin, there's oil canning. If stuff doesn't drain, different things happen. And so we really just learned by looking and observing, and then working with really great fabricators who could really kind of translate our little cardboard models into built form. And so now we've been using it for like 3 decades, and we can actually measure, and we know what 35-year-old weathering steel really looks like. It's beautiful. It turns a kind of aubergine color. Now it's actually quite a trendy material that you see around a lot. But we've been experimenting with it for quite some time. So
And you are seeing that it's patinaing and changing over time, and
oh yes,
the
for sure,
occupants really enjoy that.
yeah. Mhm.
Um, who are some of your influences, either iconic architects that you studied, or mentors that you had along the way that you can think of?
Mm. So I would say a lot of dead architects. We love the work of Alvar Aalto,
Yeah.
Carlos Scarpa, Sigurd Leverance. Asplund is a brilliant architect. A lot of them are maybe less known, like, Mies, Korb, Frank Lloyd Wright are all such amazing heroes and remarkable architects in terms of just so many contributions. But I would say that a lot of the Scandinavian architects have a real subtlety in their work, a real sense of place, the kind of deliberateness of materials that they choose and why they use them. And then again, for us in Canada, where we are, it's a similar climatic zone. It's actually even a similar forest. The geomorphology, the soil structure is actually so close to where we are, because the Canadian Shield becomes a kind of European shield on the other side of the Atlantic. And again, the tree species are very similar. The latitude is similar. So I feel like for us, there's so many lessons from modernists that are working in a similar kind of climatic environment. And I just think that you're seeing both the cultural reading and then you're seeing the physical context being read at the same time. And I just think for us, there's so many great lessons that we learn from looking closely at some of those architects.
Yeah, I definitely, the last project especially, I think Alto felt present, and Scarpa, and the way that you go from a simple partie and allow a lot of the building to be quite simple. and bespoke, and then break it down to smaller and smaller details near main entries, in places where people are going to come into closer contact with those details, on the performance space especially. That definitely resonated with me. It's interesting to see you taking on much bigger commissions now, and how your work is scaling up, and you're keeping the same principles and even material palette, but just kind of stretching it out. How have you found that transition to be so far?
I think really exciting and really challenging at the same time. This hotel is the first time we work with a developer, and it's been, I think, pretty difficult during the pandemic because the site was shut down twice because of general lockdowns, and when the site closes, it takes a long time to get all your trades back, to kind of get them back on your job, and so I think that it's been challenging, but I think really interesting because it's really a more public building that many people will be able to access. And there's a certain ruggedness that you need to have, when that happens, that I think is actually really interesting and exciting and for us. So.
So when you worked on the religious project, did you have any issues working with that client in terms of how religion plays a role in your life, and just dealing with that whole paradigm? Or did you think of it more broadly in terms of designing spaces for worship?
Yeah, no, tricky. I mean, I would say to date, we've actually done a Reform synagogue in Portland, Maine. We've actually done the Taoist temple that I shared with you, a non-denominational chapel at the University of Toronto, and the chapel you saw for the Catholic nuns. But I would say we would never call ourselves like architects of sacred space, because we actually would never, like, we've actually ended up doing all these projects, but for very different groups, and by never kind of advertising that we do it, we just ended up sort of somehow kind of connecting with these different communities. And I would say that so for all of those sacred space projects, we were never of the faith that they were. So we're coming at it really as outsiders. And in the end, it just requires that you ask a lot of questions and you try to really understand the kind of DNA of who the community is and how they interpret their kind of faith, and then really work to create spaces that have meaning to them. I would say light is free, so you don't pay for natural light.
Yeah.
And I would say that all kind of the groups we work with are all nonprofits. Money is, it takes a lot of effort to raise the money, and that you need to really use it wisely. And so I feel like how you manipulate light is kind of maybe the biggest gift that keeps giving back, and how natural light informs the space through a careful selection of materials can really be enriching to the space, especially when people come together to gather, and that it really becomes, in effect, the kind of heart and soul of the space. And so for us, those decisions are kind of not taken lightly, because they really matter in terms of the character, the atmosphere of the space. It's kind of why they want to be together, but they want to be together in spaces that really matter to them. And so I think that again, light is kind of fundamental to shaping space for us.
Yeah, I feel like almost all of the spaces you showed, whether they were for worship or not, sort of have a simple universal appeal in their connection with nature and their play of light, and the building kind of gets out of the way a little bit and just kind of showcases and highlights the context. And so it lends itself to interpretation for any faith, really.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about the framing of views, and how when and how in the process it comes up? Because you mentioned early this, there was a kitchen that was oriented right on axis with this orchard, which is, a small room, but you do spend a lot of time in it. Do you kind of look at the site very early on and find those vistas and build it into the plan right away?
I guess maybe, our approach is maybe that we're not really designing a building, but we're actually creating a place. So placemaking is kind of more important than building as object. And I think for us, the kind of, so these kind of taking advantage of certain conditions of, you know, an apple orchard or these. So in a way, like when you're washing your dishes, you're kind of not just viewing the orchard, you're in the orchard, like you're kind of in the apple orchard. And so it's like a different relationship to the context around you. So we're always looking for ways where everyday activities and the kind of place that you're in start to fuse together. And I guess if you think more about how you make a place than how you make a building, then the positioning of those things kinds of really matters. And it's really important. And it's not just, you know, oh, you need a window in this room, but you actually need to situate yourself in the place where this building is. And so those are maybe the things we think about, as opposed to it as an object that you're seeing as this kind of like, you know, monumental object, which is not really how we think about stuff.
Right. All right, two more questions. One is, how in God's name did you convince your client to build 97 custom wood fins?
So our client was a pretty amazing guy. He was a mathematician and a concert violinist. And he just wanted a really great space. And we built lots of models. We discussed everything. We met, you know, on a regular basis, and he was really ambitious, and he thought this was great and loved it, and you know, really appreciated all of the craftsmanship that went into it.
Amazing. That's a sales job like no other. And then the last thing I want to ask is just any advice you have for students that may be watching or young designers starting out their career.
So when we graduated from architecture school, we actually didn't know how to build anything. We learned a lot. We had amazing professors. It was a very exciting time. We saw a lot. We designed a lot of things. But then when it came to building things, we were kind of left going, what do we do? So, you know, Italy was really important in the school we went to. So Aldo Rossi, Vittorio Gregati, oppositions, you know, we read so much of history and theory, but we never had a lecture on Carlo Scarpa. No one ever discussed him. So in the end, when we graduated, we ended up going to visit a lot of buildings and looking really closely, reading, you know, so there's the project you see in a magazine or a book, and then there's the project in its physical context. And so I would say that you learn so many things at school. It's so enriching and important. And you learn equally by visiting projects in person, in the field, trekking through fields, finding the project that is in the book in some other location, and then seeing it in its context, seeing it weathered, seeing it not pristine like the photographs in the book, but where it's been sitting in the landscape and interacting with nature for a few decades. And each of those visits is a huge learning experience. We often bring our sketchbooks with us. And I would say it's kind of building slowly a knowledge base about architecture in context that I think is kind of like, you know, so many times, you know, the photographs crop out all the adjacent buildings, you don't see anything. And then they're usually taken like within a year of the building being built. So you don't see the weathering, the aging, the kind of the stuff that you learn so much from, like our, you know, Stelco example of seeing all their failures and actually learning from visiting all of these failures was actually really so instructive because it told you what not to do. It didn't help you figure out how exactly you should detail, but you knew the issues that you had to avoid. And I think those become huge learning experiences that are really important and super valuable that I feel for us was really kind of instrumental in shaping our understanding that, you know, there's a certain modernist supposition that buildings are these pristine objects. And the minute they're finished and people occupy them, they actually start to weather, they start to age, they're subjected 365 days a year to huge, like tons of sun, hurricanes, tornadoes, like rainstorms, like they're just subjected to Mother Nature. And that's actually the really interesting part. So this kind of like a lot of our buildings kind of start to begin by absorbing the weathering and assuming the weathering is going to happen and not that they will stay white and pristine forever. And so how do you actually find ways to make the weathering, make them better as opposed to worse? And how do you kind of interact with Mother Nature as opposed to pretending like Mother Nature doesn't exist? And I think that for us, again, the visits, the seeing actual buildings, not when they're fully finished and nicely kind of all
Right.
pristine, but over time has been such a huge and really important learning experience for us. And it's hard now because a lot of the students I teach at, a lot of the schools in the East Coast, in New Zealand, my U of T students, they kind of say, oh, I've seen that because they've seen it on their phone. They think they know the building, but unless you walk through it and experience it, you're only looking at it like a postcard. And I feel like it's so important to be in the spaces and again, to observe so much of not just the building, but the context around it.
That's a great answer. I love that. And a really nice idea to end on as we're all coming out of this pandemic and starting to travel more and take the opportunity to go see things in person and really camp out and get our own perspectives on it. So thank you so much. That was incredible. And I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your beautiful work. And I hope you keep getting bigger and better commissions in the near future.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's been really a pleasure to share the work with your community and also just to kind of engage in the question and answer, which is the part I really like because it's really more interactive. And hopefully there's kind of new aspects that are revealed beyond just seeing the work itself. So I hope that's been helpful. And it was just a pleasure to meet you guys. And I hope to get to see you in person sometime soon. So
me too.
Yeah,
great.
All right. Thank you so much. Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
Care. Yeah. Mm-hmm.